Hello, and welcome to the Empower session, Data Transformation 2 Ways Using Pipelines. My name is Leanne Snoeck, and I'm an implementation consultant at QuickBase. During this presentation, please feel free to reach out using the Q&A section to ask any questions, and you can use the chat box for any technical issues. And please stay tuned because there'll be a live Q&A session directly after this presentation. Okay, so to get started, a little bit about myself. I'm an implementation consultant at QuickBase. Recently came on board after being a customer for the past 13 years. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about some new features, specifically pipelines that are available in QuickBase, and how we can integrate those using existing QuickBase features. So just to give you a little quick start here, we'll be using a demo application that's available on the Exchange. So if you'd like to work along with us today during the workshop, you can go to the Exchange and download the Pipelines demo. And I'll put this back on the screen a little bit later in the presentation, but if you'd like to jump on that right now, go ahead and feel free. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to identify what's a Jinja. You may have heard this new language. We're going to dive into what that actually is. We're going to set up our system so that we can utilize pipelines and so that we can go through a few scenarios. And then we're going to build. And we're going to look at how these pipelines are built using data transformation within them and within fields in QuickBase. Okay, so what's a Jinja? You may have heard this term before, but I'd like to dive into ways that this helps us reimagine automations, a tool you've probably already used in QuickBase. We're going to talk about data transformation syntax that we use in pipelines, and we're also going to look at two styles and the ways that we can mix and match these different terms that we use in QuickBase. Okay, so first, let's talk about automations reimagined. As users of QuickBase, you've probably enjoyed using automations because it allows you to transform your data and move it from table to table or within your application. So why is this better? Using pipelines allows us to use if-else statements, something that's currently not available in automations. So we can also do that using a single pipeline. You may have already used automations where you have multiple ones triggering off each other to accomplish an if-else idea, but now you could do that within one pipeline. We're also able to access multiple tables within one pipeline. So we can take data from across our application, and even better, we could take it from across different systems. So we're not limited only to QuickBase. We can use systems like Salesforce or Dropbox or even Outlook to get information and transform it and use it within our QuickBase system or within other systems. And we're able to trigger on soft changes. So similarly in automations where we could set a table-to-table import or something like that, we can also schedule our pipelines to run based on a soft change or to query a bunch of records. Now, what's the other benefit of pipelines above using automations is that we can transform data while we're using it. We're not limited to creating fields that may clutter up a table in order to accomplish things that we need to do. So we can create dates that are relative and specific within pipelines. So you can say today, which is a relative date, depending on what day it is, or you can do a specific date and time. We're able to use multiple date and time and text formats without hard coding them into multiple fields. And this will become really useful when you start using other systems and moving your data from one to another, because some systems require different date formats than perhaps what lives in your QuickBase system right now. And as I mentioned, less table fields, which is great. We all want less clutter in our applications. Okay, so let's move on to how do we do this? What is the syntax that we're going to be using with pipelines? And you've heard me and probably others mention Jinja, so let's take a look at what that means. Okay, so we're going to be using two different types of syntax within pipelines. And when I say syntax, I really just mean the formula words that we're going to be using in order to accomplish what we want. So the first one that we're going to talk about is API do query construction. And you guys may be familiar with this if you've created any kind of magic buttons in QuickBase, or if you do API queries. Now, the great thing about this is that within QuickBase, in our help guides, we have a great help section that explains exactly how this looks. And I'm going to show you that in just a minute. What I'd like to talk about here is in pipelines, there are going to be two different ways that we apply syntax. And the first one is in an advanced query section. So that's a box that allows you to enter the type of query that you'd like. And this is how we would put it together. So we're going to be using the construction of the API do query. When we move on to the field transformations, so changing maybe a date or a time or the way text looks within our pipeline, we're going to be using the field transformation, and that uses Jinja templating language. And during the presentation today, we're going to go through how to utilize these within a pipeline. So stay tuned for that. As you can see here, there's a little bit of difference when you're looking at these constructions versus what you may be used to in using QuickBase formulas. So the first one is, if you look at the field transformation information here, you can see that I have text that I'm putting into the field, which is new contract. I don't need to put any quotation marks around that when I'm doing a field transformation in pipelines. The other thing that you can notice here when we look at the field transformation is that there is an A in front of this information that I have down here. That A is saying, from step A, this is what I want you to do to my field. So it's step A, the field is end date, and then we're doing the calculation here. So the calculation is we're adjusting the time by 1 year and 1 day. A few other things that you may want to notice is, again, the use of quotations. They're going to be different. In the advanced query section, we do need quotes, and it's a single quote. We are using in the advanced query section a single bracket. On the field transformation, we're using double brackets. So just a few differences to keep in mind. And what I'd like to show you now is some of the help guides that we have in QuickBase so that you can learn how to use these and identify their construction. So right now we're going to jump over, and some of you may be familiar with this, but for others not. This is our API do query help section in the QuickBase API guide. And as you can see here, there's a lot of examples of using this construction. And again, on pipelines, you're not going to need to enter query here because we're already putting it in a query field. But one of the things that I wanted to show you is that there's a lot of options besides just equals, which is what that EX means. The other options you have are all listed in this help. So you can see we could do something like contains. And just to be even more clear, this number in front is the field ID. And then you're putting a formula function just like you would in a QuickBase formula field. And then you're putting the requirement, right? So when field 16 contains customer, that's going to return those records. So this is a great resource to take a look at, especially if you're trying to do some advanced queries that maybe the basic part of pipelines does not allow you to do. So when you want to do something more advanced, I would look here. Now, the other thing that we just talked about was field transformation using Jinja. And so let's just take a look at our help guides that I've pulled up here. We have transforming your data. Now, this help page really helps us identify how to do some addition and other types of transformation that perhaps is not date and time. We have an if-else statement listed in here, which we're going to go through in our workshop today. You're also going to see some other interesting information, and it's going to explain to you how to use this within pipelines. Another great thing is that we have down here how to clear a field. That's very helpful. So this is a great resource. And then even better, we have a secondary one that's explaining to us how to work with date and time, which we're going to utilize a lot today. So as you can see here, one of the constructions that I explained before was time delta. So what this really is just adjusting the time based on whatever you put next to it. And you can see this is very similar to some of the quick-based formula fields that we already have, where you identify what the function is and then you put in brackets what you want it to do. So this page is great to understand how to call things that you may be used to, like time now. Similarly, in QuickBase, we just have the time parentheses. And then another thing that we discussed a little earlier was transforming dates. So some systems may require that a date comes in the American style or sometimes in the European style. So this is how we would take a date field that already exists and simply transform the way that it looks while it's moving through the pipeline. Okay, so these resources are here for you. I'm going to put a list at the end of the session of all the resources that should be helpful to you when building pipelines using data transformation. But let's jump back to the presentation. Okay, so here you're able to see, let's move on to the next slide. Two styles mix and match. So I've kind of mentioned this a little bit throughout the presentation, but we want to use, sometimes we're going to want to use formula fields. And this means creating a field within QuickBase that does exactly what we want it to do. And sometimes we want to do that data transformation in pipelines. And what would be the difference? So for example, one reason that you may do a formula field within QuickBase is because you need the user to be able to update it. Pipelines right now are only able to be viewed by the author of the pipeline. So if you have users that need to come in and make an update to say the amount of increase or dollars that a contract will increase, which is what we're going to look at today, you may want to put it directly in the app so that they can make those changes as they need to. A reason why you may need to use pipelines to transform data is, as we mentioned before, if it's going to another system and it needs a specific format for that other system, you're not going to need to create a field in QuickBase because it'll just kind of jam up your system a bit. This way, we can do that transformation in pipelines and nobody in the QuickBase app is the wiser. Okay, so those are our two ways of doing it. Again, there is a third reason that you may do it, and that's because possibly you haven't really learned the Jinja template language yet, and you find it a little bit easier to go through it the first way, which is creating fields that do what you need them to do in QuickBase and calling those in the pipeline. So that's what we're going to work on today. We're going to look at it doing two ways. And I would encourage everybody to try both ways so that you get a little bit more comfortable using this new language. Okay, so now that we've discussed why we would do it, let's talk about setting up our pipelines if you haven't already. We're going to go through the credentials that are required, what our pipelines environment will look like, and then we're going to go back to that slide where I can show you how to download the application. Okay, so the credentials required. You're going to need your privileges to create pipelines. These are granted by your Realm administrator, and you'll know if you have that already because you can see pipelines in your tabs at the top of your application. And you could see here we have My Apps, and then over to the right, we have pipelines, which is going to show up before any of the application tabs show up. The next thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to have a user token created, which you can do in your preferences section. And then you're going to need to have it applied to the application that you want to do work on. So as I mentioned before, you can use pipelines to move data within your app. You can also use it to move data across applications. So for example, if I wanted to move my data from one application to another, I need them both to show up in my user token. So you'll see that when you click into your user tokens, it says used in, and you're just going to want to add whatever applications you need to into that section for your user token. The third thing that would be a best practice here is to log into your service account. So as I mentioned before, pipelines are only available to the person that created them, unless you want to copy and paste them to somebody else. So the best practice here is to have a service account for your organization where things like notifications, automations, any type of shared service is created using that single account. So what I would suggest is if you have that already set up, to log into that service account now if you're going to be building along with us. And then the fourth thing that you're going to need is to set up your QuickBase channel. And just like any other channel that exists in pipelines, you're going to just need to log into it before we get started. So the first thing you do is you add your company subdomain, and that's the first part before .quickbase.com. And then you're going to add that user token, which you've applied to the application, into that slot. Okay, so our pipelines environment. As mentioned, we're only going to be using the QuickBase channel today. You do have the option to use other channels within pipelines, and once you learn this, you may want to expand to utilize those. One thing to make note of here is that all of the purple icons are QuickBase provided channels. So you do have unlimited use of those, and you can use them to call other applications inside QuickBase and outside of QuickBase. Okay, I'm going to bring up the demo application again, so anybody that hasn't downloaded it yet can take a look. And here we have the Pipelines demo app that was uploaded by Bree Mackey, and you guys should please go and download it because we're going to dive into what that looks like. Great, so now we've gotten to the part where we're going to build, and I'm going to show you how this looks in an application, and then we're going to go through the process. So first, let's tackle our use case scenario here. We are going to be using, within the application, there's already set up a few tables for you to use. And the tables that we're going to be using in this scenario are going to be our customers table and our contracts table. The criteria that we're going to be using is an end date of today and a contract auto renew is true. So what we really want to do with this data transformation is that when an end date is reached on a contract, we want the system to automatically, without us having to monitor it, go in and create a new contract for the next year. We want it to update, obviously, the start date on the new contract, a new end date, and to update the pricing based on our requirements that we've already entered in the system. Okay, so let's jump over to the demo application. And again, before that, I'm just going to reiterate that you would want to download the demo app, apply your user token to the new application you've just downloaded, and then go in and start to update some of the contract end dates. This way, when we build the pipeline, it's going to trigger for you. Okay, so let's jump into this app that we have in QuickBase. And I'm going to go back to my browser window now. And in here, I have the Pipelines demo application. Now, I'm going to tell you this is a huge bonus for everybody at this presentation, because not only do we have this use case listed in here, but there are a bunch of other use cases that are available in the app that also has documentation on how to accomplish it. So once you've done this data transformation, feel free to try to work through the other use cases and just get comfortable with pipelines. So you'll see on the homepage, we have all the different examples and how you can find that info. We also have some of the tips and tricks. So some of the things that I mentioned earlier in terms of construction of using curly brackets, making sure you use brackets, and making adjustments to different types of information. So for example, on checkboxes, you don't necessarily want to use is set because checkboxes are always set, which may not be apparent. And then we also have some information on how you would import a pipeline from somebody else's account. So let's say you did build this in your own personal account and you want to move it to a service account. there's information in here on how exactly to do that. So let's jump into our two tables that we're going to be working through the scenario on today. We have our customers table, which is a parent of the contracts table. So within here, we have all the different contracts that have been created for customer BBB. What we want to do today is we can see, I'm going to click on the most recent contract. So we have in here our auto renew is checked off, which means this is an applicable customer that we can renew when the date comes up. We have our current pricing increase that happened last year, along with our current monthly price. We have our contract start and end date. And I've created a few different fields so that we can look at creating our query and also using fields that have already been created in QuickBase in our pipeline. And this is the mix and match style. If you guys don't feel comfortable yet creating that date formula using Jinja, you can always use a date formula that you've created in QuickBase, just like you used to. So in here, I just used our today formula. And then you can see I've extricated this 2021, which would be our next contract year. And again, you can do that directly in pipelines using Jinja, or you can do it in QuickBase. So now that we've looked at what our data is, let's jump over into our pipeline so we can see how to construct these. So I'm just going to jump into pipelines right here. And this page, if you haven't seen it yet, is where all of my pipelines live across applications and across systems. So what I'm going to do in here is I just want to show you, I've already created these pipelines and I'd like to walk through what they look like. So our first pipeline here is the create renew contract, the auto renew. So let's do an edit. Now this one is not going to use our advanced filter. What we did in here is we used the fields that we created in QuickBase in order to trigger the pipeline. So our first step is to create a search. So we want to search our contracts table and determine all the pieces in the criteria. But first, what we need to do is we need to identify all the fields that we will use later on in the pipeline. So that's what I'm doing here. The next step is you can see I am not doing an advanced query. I have moved right down to the generic query section that we have in pipelines. Now, since I've created these fields within QuickBase, I can very easily call them. So I do auto renew is, and you have a bunch of options here. We want to say is yes, which means it's checked off. We have a contract ends today. Again, that's our field that just lets us know today equals today. Today equals the end date of the contract. And that's a checkbox that I created using a formula field. And then we have the contract start date exists. So we really only want to do this if our customer has already started a contract. And then what we do in this pipeline is this is going to run, we've set a schedule so that it would run every day. So this way I don't even have to think about it. Every day it's going to check for new contracts and those will be auto renewed. We could always set up notifications to go out to our clients once a contract has been auto renewed as well using other QuickBase features. So what I did here is I searched for these records and then QuickBase gathers all those records and it says, okay, what do you want me to do with them now that I've found them? So what we want QuickBase to do with them is we want to create a new record. And so in this basic pipeline that I created, which is the first way, what I did was, again, I'm going to create my records in the contracts table. I'm going to specify the fields that I'd like to use in this step, which is step B. I also have access to everything that happened in step A, which is my search. And then what I did here is I kind of cheated a little bit, right? So I used my auto renew, no quotation marks, and then I put that year in there, which is the year formula field that I created in QuickBase. But I also used some Jinja formatting down here. So this is one way to kind of get your sea legs using this new language, is that you can create some fields within QuickBase and some within pipelines using that templating language. Let's jump over to doing an advanced query. So I have this one set up. It's going to look very similar, except we're going to be using an advanced query and some more Jinja templating language in the field transformations. So if I go to my advanced filter, I'm now going to click edit in there. And you can see it's the same steps here. We have search. And again, we are going to search, that's a touch bigger. We are going to search in the contracts table. And if you do not see this contracts table listed in your dropdown, it's because you maybe have not applied that user token, so you may not be seeing what's in this application. Just a reminder. I've applied all the fields that I'm going to be using downstream, and then I created a query. And this query is saying if field number 10 equals today, and if field number 8 is equal to true, that's the records that I want to show. So you can see we did very similar setup as to the regular query where we added conditions, but we could do it within one statement. The next step is, again, we have step A where we're searching the records in the contracts table. Step A has compiled all of those that meet our criteria, and now QuickBase is saying, what do you want me to do with them? So what we want to do in this scenario is that we want to create new records for that customer. And you can see in here, again, we're going to pick what table are we going to create the records in, and that's going to be our contracts table. We have all of the information that we have in step A that we can pull in to help us create this new contract. We've specified the fields on the contracts table that we're going to want to add information to in this box. And you can see here, instead of pulling in that specific field that I create in QuickBase that says today or this year, I'm sorry, next year, what I did here is I used the Jinja formatting to say today, this year only. And you can tell that by it saying year right here. So as you can see, this is a great shortcut for me not having a field that literally just pulls out the year that I want to include in a text field. And I can do it all right in here in the contract name. And again, I'm using text here. I put these exclamation marks so that when we run the pipeline, we can tell that that's the one that we did. And again, I pulled this field from our step A. And you can tell that because it has an A in front of it. So while the field names and the Jinja templating look very similar here, the way I can tell when I come back and look at this that this is a field is by looking at that letter that precedes it. As you can tell, the Jinja templating does not include that. So here, I just pulled in the customer that came from my last contract, because I want to relate it to the same customer again. I'm in here, I can indicate from this dropdown which thing that I want every time. So that allows me to just pick from a multiple choice option. In here, I also have the contract end date. And this is another Jinja construction that we looked at a bit earlier. In there, we have the time today plus a time alteration. So we want to take today plus today changed by 1 year and 1 day. And that's going to give us our new date. The same thing with our start date. We really want this contract to start tomorrow because the current one is ending today. So we're adding 1 day to our today. You can see in this field, we've done some of that if-else statements directly within the field. And this one is pretty much saying, if our customer's start date was less than 3 years ago, and you can see that with the -3, which is a great way to include that, less than 3 years ago, we're only going to increase their price by $3, their contract price. If not, we're going to increase it by $5. And then we finally have our contract monthly price, which we are pulling down again from step A. Now that we've created this new contract, we want to take what we've done in this step B, where we've determined, hey, what's their increased price? And we want to add it to the record we just created. So their ending contract price will be the old price plus our increase. Now, there are ways to do this within one step, but just for demonstration purposes, I wanted to split it out into a second step. So you can see here, we're staying within our chain of the records that were found in our search. And we're going down the chain. We created the record, and now we want to update that record. So we're updating the record. We're only pulling in a single field here, and that field is our contract monthly price. And this allows us to do the math right in the field, right in the pipeline, and then it will be placed in the field. So just to recap what we did here is we scheduled our pipeline for once a day to look for any records in our contract table that met our criteria. They could be auto-renewed, and their auto-renew was up today. We then had QuickBase take those records and create a new contract record for them, where we determined what the new year of the contract should be, what customer it should be related to, the new start and end dates, what our price increase should be. And finally, we used another step in our pipeline to update that price using the determined increase amount plus the price. So I hope that walking through how we use these different types of data transformations will help you understand how you can incorporate them into your own application. But before that, let's just watch this query in action. So we've scheduled this pipeline, and I'm just going to go back quickly to my application. This is not it. And I'm going to just go in and see and make sure that I have a contract that is ending today. And I do. So my customer BBB has a contract that's ending on my today, and we're going to want it for the next year. So let's just go into customer BBB and let's run this pipeline. So even though we've scheduled the pipeline to run once a day, we can also trigger it on our own if data changes. So let's just go in and click Run Pipeline. And as you do that, you can see the pipeline starting. You're going to be able to see it identifying the records that meet our criteria. And then you'll see it making those data transformations. So here it's found our record, which is great. And it's going, you can see step A found the record. Step C, well, we have a step B in here. Step C, it's updating the record. And step B, it created the record. So a little out of order, but it did all the things that we wanted it to do. And it did it in the order that it needed to behind the scenes. So let's just take a quick look here. And you can see here, we have our new auto renew. Our increase was only $3 because the customer is a new customer. And in here, we have our new amount, right? So we have our new end date and start date starting tomorrow and ending 1 year in the future. So that is how you build a pipeline using multiple types of transformation tools, QuickBase formula fields that you've used in the past, and the new pipelines syntax. Let's jump back to the presentation as we get prepared for the Q&A. Okay, so now that we've gone through the demonstration, here are the resources that I mentioned earlier. You should be able to use these to help you if you get stuck doing these pipelines yourself. They're really great tools and they've helped me a lot. And finally, just to recap, I hope everybody feels that they understand a little bit more what the Jinja syntax is and what it's for, and how you can utilize pipelines to enhance your application and your systems, even more so than you could with automations. We went through the setup, and everybody should now have their system set up to utilize pipelines. And I hope that you feel confident in building using new data transformation tools and can apply this to new use cases that you have in your own applications. So thank you very much. I'm happy to start the live Q&A. And also, if you would please, there is going to be a link in the chat box to fill out a review of this session. So any feedback is greatly appreciated. Thank you.